So, enough of introductions. I think we'll go straight into the very first question, which is going to be asked by Joe.
My name's Joe Edgard. I'm a town planner and designer. I've done a lot of work in the private sector for house builders and other developers. And I would like to ask the panel how they would explain the purpose and the benefits of community involvement, particularly to a developer who is very concerned about the extra time and cost that might involve.
Thank you very much. Barry, I'm going to ask you to launch off with the first answer.
Thank you for that. Okay. Really good question, actually, because there are lots of costs, lots of risks. There's a big downside, actually, with community involvement, as well as the benefits. I'm not going to dwell on the costs at the moment, but we've got to be realistic about it. But in my view, the benefits definitely override the cost by a fair margin. If it's done well, and it has to be done well, and if the community take up the opportunities that are provided for them, with those two conditions, the benefits can be really fantastic. Benefits to local authorities, yes. Benefits to developers, yes. Benefits to the community, of course. Benefits to the whole system, actually. So I'd really like to focus on four, I think. One, the first real benefit is that I think it improves the legitimacy of the planning system and the development process. And we shouldn't dismiss that. It's a really important benefit at the moment, getting communities involved in the really important decisions that impact on their lives. I mean, at the moment, aren't we? We're all going through a phase of being very cynical about government, about our representatives, about the ability of our representatives to really represent the community. MPs, scandals and all the rest of it. Actually, community involvement is a really important part of democracy. And as a result, it is really important, as I say, for the legitimacy of the system. So that's my first big benefit. That's why, my first explanation for the purpose of community involvement. Second one, I think it actually leads to better planning and architecture in the long run. If I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are architects, work with clients. I mean, you yourself, the questioner, said you're an architect. When you're designing a building, you wouldn't dream of not talking to your client, would you? You've got to have a conversation with your client. It's the same with the bigger decisions, the planning decisions, the decisions about the future of Bristol, the future of London. We've got to talk to our client, and to me, the big client for these big decisions is the community. We can't get away from that. Then the third benefit for me is that community involvement can really build communities. We have difficulty, don't we, in modern society of people being just interested in their own little patch, interested in being an individual, interested in what's in it for them. Well, I think community involvement can bring communities together. And we've got plenty of examples of that where originally a community wasn't engaged in the planning process, in architecture, in decisions like that, have got involved, and real communities have emerged as a result. And I think the last benefit for me is not only does it build communities, but it really empowers communities. It gives communities a real chance to influence the things that are going to affect their lives.
Thanks very much, Barry. Craig, I'm going to ask you next. You act for a lot of clients. What's their attitude to being told that they have to engage with the community when they think they know what they want?
I think it varies hugely. Some developers see it as a necessary evil that you have to go through and see it as a constraint on their time and their business activity, and it's going to cost them money. I think that's a mistaken position to come from. I think we shouldn't frame developers as always being, we don't want to do this. The very best developers understand that it empowers their means by which they do development. And in my introductory notes, I said I think it's good for business, and there's nothing wrong with saying this is good for business. It actually facilitates development. It actually gets us through the necessary checks and balances. Any development needs to be gone through the planning process, the consultation that we need to do. So I think if people are avoiding it, they're not going to be able to be in business in the future. And we do better business if we engage. So I will be talking to developers to talk about what they're using their language. What is the upside of engagement with communities and involvement? And there's a big upside.
Okay, I'm going to put this back to the audience because a number of you will have had experience of community involvement, and perhaps you might find that there's too much of it, or perhaps it's just tokenistic. Anybody in the audience got a view that they'd like to express on this?
Can I pick up
Please.
if nobody else is going to? There's one thing that I think the community involvement process does bring about, and Barry's talked about the expense, but one thing it does bring about is some degree of certainty when you actually get to the legal process. So if you have your community involvement and you know what the community is going to say about your design, you've got, at the point when you put in your planning application or you submit your development local development framework, you know what the issues are already. It's not going to come at you like an avalanche at that point. You've already had them raised to your attention and you've dealt with them with luck. If not, you at least know what's going to be brought up. So this early involvement can be a very positive thing in that it can make your programme work better.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go back to the questioner now. And Joe, have you heard a convincing argument in favour of community involvement?
I think so, and I think the point about sort of using the language of the developer to communicate that, and I've been writing down as we've gone through. There's sort of 4 or 5 points which are about making it more democratic, about the community being the client. Building new and existing communities, and also that sort of certainty and legitimacy that I think are all very important and good points.
Okay, thank you. There's another point in the audience here at the front.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a practising planner, but I'm quite interested in what duties are there on local government or on the private sector to engage with the community in their development proposals.
Thank you. Jeff, I'm going to ask you to help there and also add your opinion on this question.
Right. There are requirements, and they are legal requirements within the planning process now, that participation, engagement, whatever one wants to call it, actually has to happen during the plan-making process at all the stages, even down to some of the details there. It's always questionable to what extent that is actually enforced through the planning process, to what extent it's picked up at inquiries, picked up at appeals, picked up through the planning inspectors. And I think we're all probably slightly ambiguous about whether it's given the clout it should have from the regulations, but it's certainly clearly there. It gets more ambiguous when you get to the pre-application stage, working with developers in particular, in that a lot of what are called statements of community involvement make general statements about the need for applicants and developers to engage with the community before the application stage. But a lot of them are very poorly written, they're very inadequate. We're lucky in Bristol, the Bristol Statement of Community Involvement not only is very, very strong on that, but through organisations such as the Neighbourhood Planning Network that you've heard about, that is being enforced and encouraged. And there's already a catalogue of good examples in Bristol of showing, as Craig suggested, that it's good business for the developer to actually do it. So we're in a sort of cyclic process where, I'm not all entirely convinced that regulation is always the way to do it. One really does need to demonstrate the speed and the certainty and the cost saving to developers, applicants, and the planning system that can come from it. If you really do that, then it will flow. But there is, in some cases, in the planning side of it, some background legislation just to mean it cannot at least be avoided, even if we don't yet guarantee it's done well.